They thought they owned my road. But they forgot one thing. I built it. That sentence alone should tell you how insane this whole story really is. Let me take you back to the beginning, before the HOA drama, before the signs, before the tow trucks. Because to understand why this whole neighborhood war even started, you need to know the truth about the road. See, when I bought my house 10 years ago, it was nothing special. A modest home tucked away in a quiet part of town. The price was good because the property was set back behind a patch of trees, and the only way in or out was a bumpy dirt path that turned into mud every time it rained. Realtors warned me, "Daniel, the road might be a problem. Deliveries, guests, even emergency vehicles. Nobody likes driving on dirt." They weren't wrong. The first winter, I nearly got stuck twice. My mailbox leaned sideways from delivery trucks that refused to come all the way in. Even the garbage truck driver complained, saying he'd only pick up my bins if I dragged them all the way to the main street. So I did what most homeowners don't. I invested. Out of my own pocket. I hired contractors, pulled the permits, and turned that muddy path into a fully paved road. It wasn't just a driveway. It was wide enough for 2 cars to pass comfortably, lined with gravel shoulders and drainage ditches to keep water from pooling. It cost me more than $20,000. That's not pocket change. That's months of saving, planning, and work. When it was finally finished, I remember standing on the edge of that shiny new asphalt, feeling proud. This was mine. My improvement. My effort. Fast forward a few years, and the neighborhood started to change. A homeowners association, an HOA, was formed when a cluster of new houses went up nearby. At first, I didn't care much. They sent letters about dues, about community landscaping, about guidelines. I ignored most of it, because technically, my property wasn't even included in their original map. I was off to the side, tucked away with my private road. But the HOA didn't like that. One by one, they started creeping into my life. First, it was a friendly reminder in my mailbox suggesting I keep my grass at a certain height. Then, it was a notice about the color of my fence, even though my house wasn't under their authority. When I pointed that out, the HOA president, Karen of course, told me, "Well, Daniel, all homes in this neighborhood should maintain a consistent look. You wouldn't want to be the odd one out, would you?" That should have been my warning sign. But the real trouble didn't begin until they set their sights on my road. I'll never forget the morning I walked outside and saw it. Brand new metal signs, freshly bolted in the ground on both sides of my pavement. Black and white, stamped with bold letters. Private road, HOA access only. No trespassing without HOA permission. At first, I thought maybe they'd accidentally put the signs on the wrong street. But no, they were planted right in the middle of my property. The road I built, with my money, on land that belonged to me. My jaw dropped. I just stood there, coffee in hand, staring at the absurdity. A couple of neighbors walked by, glanced at me, then looked away awkwardly. They knew what had happened. They just didn't want to get caught in the middle. I yanked one of the signs out of the ground, stormed to the HOA office, and demanded an explanation. That's when Karen gave me the line that still makes my blood boil. "Oh, Daniel, that road is part of the community now. We decided it's a shared access road for everyone. You can't just claim it as your own anymore." I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. Her smug smile told me she believed every word she was saying. "You decided?" I asked, "Who gave you the right to decide anything about my land?" Her response? "The board voted. It's community property now. If you have an issue, you can file a formal complaint." Community property? A board vote? Since when does a group of neighbors get to erase the deed I hold in my safe? I walked out of that office, shaking with rage. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table flipping through my paperwork, the permits, the receipts, the surveyor's maps, I realized what was happening. The HOA wasn't confused. They weren't mistaken. They were testing me. They wanted to see if I'd fight back, or if I'd just roll over like so many other homeowners they'd bullied into submission. But here's the thing. They picked the wrong guy. Because that road wasn't just some strip of asphalt. It was a symbol of my independence. It was proof that I didn't need their guidelines, their votes, or their ridiculous power trips. I had built something with my own hands and my own money, and now they were trying to steal it. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. If they wanted to take my road without asking, then I was going to remind them exactly who it belonged to. When the HOA first planted those signs on my road, I thought I had seen the height of their arrogance. But I was wrong. That was just a warm-up. The real nightmare began a few weeks later, when they started treating my private road like their personal parking lot. It started small. 1 or 2 cars here and there pulled over along the side of the pavement. At first, I ignored it, thinking maybe someone just stopped temporarily. But then it turned into a routine. Every night, more cars appeared. By the end of the week, my once clear road was jam-packed like a dealership lot. SUVs, sedans, minivans, even one rusted-out camper van that hadn't moved in months. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The same neighbors who used to wave politely as they passed now acted like they had every right to block my access. Delivery trucks couldn't get through. Guests visiting my house had to park far away and walk in. And me? I had to zigzag around a line of vehicles just to reach my own garage. IT wasn't just inconvenient. It was humiliating. Imagine paying tens of thousands of dollars to build something, only to watch strangers claim it, trash it, and then shrug as if it never belonged to you in the first place. Finally, one evening, I snapped. I marched straight to the HOA office and demanded to see the president, Karen. She was sitting behind her desk, a smug grin plastered on her face like she'd been waiting for this confrontation. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "your residents are blocking my road. This needs to stop. Now." She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and replied in the most condescending tone I've ever heard. "Daniel, it's not just your road anymore. It's a community access point now. Our board voted to allow overflow parking. It benefits everyone." I blinked, trying to process the audacity. Community access? Overflow parking? "Karen, that road sits entirely on my deed. It doesn't belong to the HOA. It doesn't belong to the board. It doesn't belong to everyone. It belongs to me." That's when she leaned forward, lowered her voice, and said something I'll never forget. "You can wave your little papers around all you want, Daniel, but here's the truth. You're one man. We're an entire board. If you want to fight us, you'll lose." That sentence lit a fire in me. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a threat. She wasn't saying the law was on her side. She was saying the power was that I left the office fuming, my fists clenched, my blood boiling. But what really pushed me over the edge wasn't even Karen. It was what happened that same night when I tried to leave my driveway. A neighbor's car was parked halfway across the road, blocking my exit completely. I knocked on their door, politely asked them to move it. And you know what they said? "Oh, the HOA told us we could park there. It's fine. Just wait until tomorrow." Wait until tomorrow? On my own road? That was the moment I realized how far this nonsense had gone. The HOA had poisoned the whole neighborhood into believing they owned something they didn't. And now my life, my daily routines, were being dictated by their arrogance. The following week, things got worse. The HOA started handing out parking permits. Actual laminated cards stamped with their logo, allowing residents to leave their cars on my property. It was surreal. I found one tucked under my windshield wiper, as if they were doing me a favor. That was the breaking point. They weren't just trespassing. They were institutionalizing it, turning my land into their parking garage. Every car that sat on my road was another slap in the face, another reminder that they thought they were untouchable. But here's the thing about arrogance. It blinds people. They were so busy patting themselves on the back, so convinced they had won, that they didn't notice me watching. They didn't notice me documenting. They didn't notice the quiet fury building inside me every single day. And while they laugh at my frustration, I was already planning. Because unlike them, I didn't need votes. I didn't need a board. I didn't need power games or intimidation tactics. I had the law. I had the paperwork. And most importantly, I had patience. So when Karen smirked and told me, "If you don't like it, Daniel, take it up with the board," she thought she crushed me. She thought she'd humiliated me into silence. But little did she know, her arrogance had just handed me the perfect excuse. Because from that day forward, I stopped arguing. I stopped knocking on doors. I stopped begging. Instead, I quietly prepared to show the HOA and the entire neighborhood that I wasn't the one who would lose. They thought they could steal my road. But soon, they were going to lose something far more valuable. By this point, I knew arguing with the HOA was pointless. They had numbers. They had influence. And worst of all, they had convinced the entire neighborhood that their word was law. But I had something far stronger than all of that: patience and proof. The first step in my plan was simple: confirmation. I wanted to make absolutely sure I wasn't crazy, that the road was 100% mine. Because when you go up against people as manipulative as an HOA board, you can't just rely on common sense. You need cold, hard evidence. So, I went back to the county clerk's office where I had filed the original permits years earlier. I pulled out dusty folders, sign maps, and official plats that clearly showed my property line. And there it was in black and white: the road, the drainage ditches, even the easements, all that was included in my deed. The HOA's boundaries ended before my pavement even began. No gray area. No loopholes. The road was mine, fair and square. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with the papers spread out like battle maps, I realized something important. I didn't need to ask for permission. I didn't need to explain myself to Karen or her board. The law was already on my side. All I needed to do was enforce it. But how? That was the tricky part. See, I could have gone to police right then and there. I could have filed trespassing complaints and demanded citations for every car parked illegally on my land. But here's the thing: HOAs thrive on drama. If I had gone in guns blazing, they would have twisted it, painting me as the villain who attacked the community. No, I needed something smarter, something bigger, something that would not only prove I was right, but would also humiliate them so badly that they'd never dare cross me again. That's when the idea struck me. Towing, it was elegant, it was legal, and best of all, it was humiliating. Nothing makes people angrier than watching their shiny cars disappear on the back of a tow truck. So I got to work. Step 1. Signage. I knew I couldn't just call tow trucks without warning. That would make it look like I was the aggressor. So I ordered a dozen heavy-duty reflective signs online. They weren't flimsy plastic ones either. These were bold, professional, and impossible to miss. Big red letters screamed: "No parking. Private property. Tow-away zone." When they arrived, I spent an entire Saturday morning bolting them up on both sides of the road. Every 20 feet, another warning. By the time I was done, the place looked less like a suburban neighborhood and more like a restricted military base. Step 2, coordination. I called every towing company within a 50-mile radius. At first, they were skeptical. Nobody wants to get in the middle of a neighborhood squabble. But once I showed them the deed and explained the situation, they started to listen. I signed contracts, arranged rates, and made sure every driver knew the exact boundaries of my property. And then came step 3, patience. Because I knew exactly what would happen. The HOA would laugh at my signs. They'd call them illegal. They'd ignore them, just like they ignored me. And every time they ignored me, they dug themselves deeper into my trap. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. The very next day, Kara herself drove up and parked her SUV right under one of my glowing red "No parking" signs. She even smirked at me as she got out, like she was daring me to do something. Perfect. Over the next week, more and more cars piled onto my road. Residents felt emboldened, waving their little HOA-issued parking permits like golden tickets. One neighbor even said to me, "You can put up as many signs as you want, Daniel. But if the HOA says we can park here, then we can park here." That was exactly what I wanted. Proof of their arrogance. Proof that they had been warned and chose to ignore it. Behind the scenes, I was making my final preparations. I scheduled the towing operation for a Saturday morning, when the road would be the most crowded. Families would be home. Cars would be parked. And the HOA wouldn't be able to spin it as some kind of misunderstanding. I remember the night before vividly. I stood on my porch, Looking down at the line of cars clogging my property, their shiny hoods reflecting the streetlights. Each one felt like an insult. Each one felt like a challenge. And tomorrow, each one would be gone. I barely slept that night, running to the plan in my head over and over. The paperwork was ready. The tow trucks were lined up. And I had my camera batteries charged, ready to capture the whole thing. Because I didn't just want to take back my road. I wanted everyone in the neighborhood, and especially Karen, to see that this wasn't a battle they could win. When the sun rose the next morning, I felt calm for the first time in weeks. My plan was in motion, and soon the HOA would learn a lesson they'd never forget. Saturday morning arrived, and for the first time in weeks, I felt excited to step outside my front door. The road, as expected, was jam full. SUVs, pickup trucks, sedans, lined bumper to bumper like they owned the place. Karen's shiny black SUV was right at the front, parked diagonally across the shoulder, as if she wanted to make a statement. And honestly, she had no idea just how much of a statement she was about to make, unwittingly, in my favor. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, pretending it was just another lazy weekend morning. But inside, I was buzzing, because today was the day my plan unfolded. At exactly 9 a.m., I heard it, the low rumble of diesel engines echoing down the main street. One by one, tow trucks turned the corner, rolling in like an armored convoy. My neighbors froze mid-step. Joggers stopped. Curtains twitched open as people peeked through their blinds. Nobody had ever seen something like this in our quiet little suburb. The first tow truck pulled up beside Karen's SUV. The driver hopped out, professional and calm, clipboard in hand. He nodded to me, and I handed him the signed paperwork. The deed showing my property lines, the towing contracts, and the legal warnings from the signs. That was all he needed. Within minutes, the truck's massive metal arm reached under the SUV, clamped down, and lifted it off the ground. The alarm shrieked to life, blaring through the neighborhood like a war siren. That was when chaos erupted. Doors flew open. Neighbors spilled out of their houses, yelling and waving their arms. Karen came sprinting down the road, her face redder than I'd ever seen it. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice cracking. "That's my car. Put it down right now." The tow driver didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, this vehicle is parked on private property. I have the legal right to remove it." "Private property?" Karen snapped, spinning toward me. "This is community property. We voted." I calmly sipped my coffee. "You can vote all you want, Karen, but the county deed doesn't lie. This road is mine." The look on her face when she realized I wasn't bluffing? Priceless. While she argued, the second tow truck was already hooking up another vehicle. A silver minivan, tires screeching as it was pulled onto flatbed. Its owner came running out in his pajamas, shouting, "Wait, wait, that's my wife's car. We have kids." The driver just pointed at the giant red signs lining the road. "Should have read the warning, sir." Car after car vanished. The once packed road grew emptier by the minute as tow trucks hauled away vehicle after vehicle, alarms blaring, horns honking, neighbors shouting in disbelief. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. And every second of it was legal. By the time the fifth tow truck rolled out with its load, the neighborhood had gone eerily quiet. The shouting died down. The smug looks vanished. All that was left were stunned faces and an empty road. Karen, however, wasn't done. She stormed up to me, fists clenched, her voice trembling with rage. "You'll pay for this, Daniel. I'll call the police. I'll call the county. I cut her off, holding up the folder of documents like a shield. Already done. I spoke with the county clerk. I spoke with law enforcement. Everything here is legal, Karen. The only ones breaking the law were the people parking on my property." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had no comeback. Neighbors slowly drifted back inside their homes, muttering among themselves. Some looked angry. Some looked embarrassed. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. The HOA had overstepped, and I had called their bluff. By noon, the last tow truck rumbled away, leaving nothing behind but clean pavement and the sound of birds chirping in the trees. For the first time in months, my road was empty. Mine again. I stood there in the silence, breathing it in, feeling like a man who had just reclaimed his kingdom. And Karen? She sulked back to her house, humiliated, powerless, and with no car in her driveway. That morning, I didn't just take back my property. I sent a message. A loud, undeniable message that echoed to the whole neighborhood. I am not the kind of neighbor you can push around, by the time the last tow truck disappeared. Silence hung heavy over the neighborhood. The same road that had been crammed full of cars just hours before now sat completely empty, as if nothing had ever happened. For me, it was the sweetest silence I'd ever heard. For the HOA, it was a sound of defeat. But the story didn't end there. Oh no, this was just the beginning of the fallout. That very evening, the HOA scrambled to hold an emergency meeting. You could practically feel the panic in the air. Karen and the other board members rushed around, sending emails, knocking on doors, and dragging anyone they could into the community center. The agenda was simple: damage control. When I walked by, I could hear raised voices echoing out the windows. People were furious, not at me, but at them. Neighbors who'd lost hundreds of dollars in towing fees and impound charges demanded answers. Parents with kids who needed rides were livid. One man shouted so loudly I could hear him from the street, "You told us we had the right to park there. Now we're out money because of you." Inside that meeting, the HOA tried everything. They blamed me. They claimed I was being unreasonable. They even suggested I forged documents to trick the tow companies. But here's the problem with lying. You can only spin it so far before the truth crushes you. And I had truth on my side. By the next day, copies of my deed and property map were circulating around the neighborhood. People saw for themselves that the road was mine. The HOA's excuses fell apart like wet cardboard. Karen, of course, doubled down. She marched up to my door, red-faced and shaking, waving a stack of papers. "This isn't over, Daniel," she snapped. "We'll sue you for harassment. We'll take this to court." I smiled calmly, motioning to the cameras mounted around my porch. "Go ahead. Every word, every sign, every warning I gave has been recorded. You'll lose, Karen, just like you lost today." She froze, realizing I had evidence of everything. For the first time since this war began, I saw something in her eyes I never thought I'd see: fear. After that, the HOA tried to go quiet. They stopped sending letters. They stopped pushing their rules on me. But the damage was already done. Their reputation was shattered. One by one, board members resigned under pressure from angry residents. And a few months later, Karen herself quietly stepped down. No announcement, no farewell speech. She just vanished in the role, humiliated and powerless. The neighborhood changed after that. People became friendlier, less hostile. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, families started planting gardens, painting fences, and living how they wanted. And me? I finally had peace again. My road stayed clear, my driveway accessible, and my rights respected. But here's the funny thing. Not a single neighbor ever apologized for parking on my road. Not one person said, "Daniel, you were right." And honestly, I didn't need them to, because the victory wasn't in their words. It was in their silence. The silence of an HOA that no longer dared to cross me. The silence of cars that never again touched my pavement. The silence of community that finally learned what happens when arrogance meets someone who refuses to back down. And I'll tell you this much. If I had backed down, if I had let them steamroll me, it never would have stopped. First, it was my road. Next, it would have been my yard, my house, my freedom to live the way I wanted. That's how HOAs operate. They push and push and push until you finally break. But sometimes, the best way to fight back isn't with shouting or threats. It's with calm, calculated action, with patience, with the law. And when you do it right, you don't just win, you make sure they never try it again. So, to anyone listening to the story, know your rights. Stand your ground. Because bullies, whether they're in school, in the workplace, or running an HOA, only have power when you let them. I didn't let them. And because of that, I didn't just get my road back. I got my peace back. And Karen? Well, let's just say the sound of her SUV being hauled away that morning still plays in my head like the sweetest music I've ever heard.